Hello, everyone, and welcome back to this episode. Well, welcome back to Inlay Terms, but the second episode of the day. I'm your host, Payman Ascari. As you can tell, I am totally unprofessional, but I'm joined here by a very professional People's Party candidate, Mr. Grant Strem. How are you doing, Grant?
Doing great. Nice to see you, and thanks for having me on.
No, anytime. People's Party candidates are always welcome. Grant, before we will touch on the Liberal leadership convention yesterday, but before we get to that, why don't we start with a little about yourself? What riding are you running in, and then tell the audience um, where you grew up, where you are now, and what do you do for a living?
Sure. I'm a 44-year-old born in Calgary. I'm riding. My riding is Signal Hill, and I've never been in politics before, but I'm trying to hopefully provide an avenue for better governance in Canada, or an option for that. My background after high school, I was a professional geologist. I did a couple degrees at the University of Calgary. The second one was in reservoir characterization, the first in geology, and worked in upstream oil and gas and exploration for the first half of my career. And then most of the last 10 years was dedicated to building up a large hydrogen from oil fields business. So clean energy business that was eventually mostly purchased by Americans who installed their own board and management. So that freed up some extra time for me to look at politics a little bit more than usual for the first time in my life. So I had always sort of paid, as a taxpayer, some attention and money to what our government's up to, and have noticed that I've been increasingly upset by what I consider to be a whole bunch of initiatives that I don't think are good uses of money. And one of the big ones for me is I don't think that Canada should be funding foreign wars and highly involved to a huge extent in, I think, avoidable international conflicts. So we can talk more about, I guess, if you want, my various reasons for why I thought it'd be a good idea to have someone on the ballot for Signal Hill for People's Party of Canada. But I guess maybe I'll start there. The reason that I am is because somebody invited me last July, kind of haphazardly, to an event in Red Deer, Alberta, just north of Calgary, sort of between Calgary and Edmonton. And I ended up hearing Maxime Bernier speak for about 2 hours. And I found myself agreeing with basically everything he said. And I was very interested by the statistics and the numbers that he was bringing to describe certain problems in our economy and in the structure of basically how Canada is changing very rapidly in terms of mass immigration. And that was the focus of that topic. I read up a lot more later on what is this People's Party thing. I sort of remembered him from when he was arrested during COVID, resisting the lockdowns, which I was also upset during COVID, where I felt that, we were supposedly guaranteed certain rights of assembly and things like that. And to have suddenly, you can't go to work, you can't go to church, you can't meet with your friends. And that seemed like an overstep to me by governments. I think that people could self-select to isolate, but to not be able to, in my case, fly. I have children that live in a different province, and I have 50-50 parenting, so week on, week off. And so I had to fly if I wanted to see my kids. My business was in Calgary and my kids were elsewhere. So it was basically, I felt upset that I could not get on an aircraft unless I complied with an experimental vaccination. So I guess there were a number of factors in terms of overspending by government, and some things related to the way children are taught to look at the world in our schools. I think it's cruel, actually. I have 4 children, and I think it's cruel when you confuse a child about very basic things about their own biology and make them second guess for example, what gender they are, can be a huge and destructive distraction for the overwhelming majority of children. Not to say that there aren't some cases where people need specific attention, and if people do genuinely have some problem with how they are, maybe they need some accommodation and that type of thing. But to just on with a broad brush confuse society-wide all the children who go to public schools in Canada, I think is incredibly destructive and distracting. And so instead of learning math and having spelling tests and I think base level skill building, they're presented with things that they should not be, as a baseline idea, presented with. So yeah, anyway, after seeing Maxime talk and reading more about the People's Party of Canada, I thought that's really, really cool. I wonder who's the People's Party candidate in my riding. And after I was done my business, some people that I knew and investors, they said, maybe you should go into politics because you seem to have like inside conversations, political ideas, or at least concerns. And I noticed that there was nobody listed on the ballot for, as a candidate for the People's Party, and thought, well, I want there to be someone on the ballot for the People's Party of Canada, ideally in every district across Canada. And so I'm going to put my name forward and see if they accept me. And so I did that. I think I applied in August or September and was accepted. So I've been out collecting my 100 signatures to officially be the representative on the ballot when an election is called. And that when is a question that I think seems to be hotly debated. There are reasons to believe that it could be very soon, and there are reasons to wonder if it might be, unfortunately, delayed for some time. So,
or at all, if at all.
Yeah. Yeah, or at all, perhaps. Yeah. Like, for example, in Ukraine, I've been astonished and shocked where people say we're defending democracy, but canceling elections is not a democratic thing to do at all. It's like the opposite. So,
what's my favorite one? When they say, Donald Trump, like it was very inappropriate of him to talk like that to another president. I'm like, he's not president. They suspended elections. He's a nobody.
Yeah, I arguably, if you force yourself into a leadership role beyond your term that you're legally allowed to, I think that means that you're completely illegitimate as the leader. Seems logical. So you said you wanted to talk a little bit about the liberal inner workings and
yeah, we can get there. Sorry, you froze there for a second. That's why I didn't respond. First things first, we got our loyal viewer, Prairie. I see you. How's it going? What was I going to ask you? Okay, immigration. They've stretched our country's culture to such extremes that I don't even know what's right or wrong. I was watching the leadership convention last night. Jean Chrétien came up. Guy could barely speak English. I'm like, how can I tell newcomers coming into the country that they have to assimilate when our former prime minister is having difficulty? But the reason I mentioned that, to segue into Alberta, you guys don't just have problems with immigration from outside. You have problems with internal immigration also, where the rest of Canada is flocking to Alberta. Am I correct?
Yeah, you are. So I grew up in Calgary through the 80s and 90s when, of course, there was a big oil boom, a sustained oil boom, pulling in engineers and workers from all over, the world, really. So for me, multiculturalism was never a hot topic. I had friends from all different skin colors, and they can reflect certain wavelengths of light or absorb certain wavelengths of light. None of us cared or even really talked about it. We just knew so-and-so, his dad was from Japan, and so-and-so, we even kind of, I think, in a camaraderie kind of way, maybe observe these things, but we were all tight friends. And there wasn't any big push. So I remember, back then, in school, they would say things like, it's not right to stereotype certain groups. And, there's a lot of, I think, reasonable education things that happened back then. But things went, I think nowadays, things have gone very strange to the point where sort of Northern European or Western European descendants who may have been in Canada for generations are feeling like it's bad or wrong that they are who they are. And that should not be. I think everybody needs to be able to feel good about themselves, no matter who they are or where they're from. But yeah, there's been a big cultural shift. So, a lot of the workmen in the oil patch were from Newfoundland and Quebec and various other parts of the world. And, we just kind of get used to the accents and get on with it. But there was always, I think, a sort of a main sort of Calgarian identity until, in my opinion, the last 5 or 10 years, that people just, kind of adapted to, and more or less. So you put on your funny hat during Stampede, your silly boots, and you sort of try and engage in the civic events that have been traditions for a long time. And whether it's Christmas or whatever it might be, Halloween or things like that. And sort of, yeah, there was always some awareness and respect of Chinese New Year and all these other things. People are aware that Hanukkah existed. And everybody kind of like celebrated to some extent or respected that was going on. But it seems really, when it accelerates to the point when you get to an airport and you don't even, walking past a crowd of 50 conversations, you might not hear more than 3 of them in English. It feels really weird. And I think a lot of people are starting to feel a little bit panicked about that. So it changes how the whole service industry works, how the wages for local teenagers are, because, if you can hire somebody where the government subsidizes somebody from another country to come take a job making pizza or something, then they're not, why would the pizza company hire a local teenager? And so there's all these different, I think, unintended challenges of mass immigration into places like Calgary, where you're straining the systems that are there. So there's an infrastructure for housing and sewage and doctors and schools and things like that. And if it's massively over demanded compared to its supply, you end up with a lot of suffering. And it looks like to most locals, or let's say people who've been around a long time, like most of it's unnecessary and involuntary suffering. Like, why do we have a couple of million extra from last year, and like in the last 5 years? Like, why did Canada grow? Wasn't Canada like 30 million people? Now it's 42. It's just like it seems like a preventable and unusual thing to do. And there's a whole bunch of society-wide obvious problems that come from that, not only in just like services, like why do I have to wait for 15 hours to see a doctor when I break my knee or whatever it might be, to affordability crisis. So the cost of living, a lot of the people that are coming in, like, I don't get me wrong, I love a great solid doctor or engineer coming into Canada. I think that everyone who comes to Canada should be making Canada more wealthy and prosperous and safe. So if that's not the case, if they're not making Canada more wealthy, prosperous, and safe by coming here, maybe they shouldn't come here. And because it kind of drags down society, and then you end up society has to pay for a lot of things that they didn't before, and new social services and whatnot, all through created money. So and of course that just increases the money supply, and you end up with sort of runaway cost of affordability. So with more, in some cases, more scarce resources like housing. So and some that are elastic to demand, but the value of money has gone down. So like everything's more expensive, but some things are way more expensive, like rent.
I have a question. When you use this argument on voters that, if we're bringing immigrants in, they should add to the country, not make it more expensive, make it worse. Does that resonate with your voters and your community? Or do you get pushback like, oh, you racist, we're going to vote liberal and open up the borders?
I think it's always a mixture of reactions. So some people are completely close to the idea and they'd rather bring in like every single person in Africa and India and China and have them all in Canada. And if you say otherwise, that would be like an end member of let's have everybody here, open borders. There are no limits. And then on the other side, you've probably got some that's maybe a little too ferocious in their defense of things. So like culture does evolve and it does shift through time, but that should be, and usually historically is, a gradual process other than catastrophic wars or famines. So, to gradually bring in some smart doctor from Iran and some, beautiful engineer from wherever, I think there's a whole bunch of benefit to society over the long term of bringing good people in and who make it more prosperous and safe. And that's just, for most people, a logical thing. Whereas if someone wants to move here because they need a bunch of complex surgeries and dealing with their chronic illnesses and stuff like that, it doesn't seem fair to Canadians who have been paying into the tax base their whole lives to suddenly be overwhelmed and not have those services available to themselves, for example.
We got a question from the audience from Prairie. She's actually in the prairies. I can't remember if Saskatchewan or Manitoba. What do you think about Danielle Smith and her ideas of increasing the population of Alberta through immigration?
In general, I like Danielle Smith, but I'm not aware of her intention of increasing the population of Alberta through immigration. I would hope that it involves bringing in people who make Alberta more prosperous and safe. But if it's just to, mop floors at Tim Hortons or whatever other example, that's not really beneficial to the economy of Alberta in a meaningful way, I would hope that that's avoided. So, yeah. Do you know, Payman, what the thrust of the question is, or what Danielle Smith's?
Yeah, so there's one federally at the national level, the Century Initiative. They want Canada to go to 100 million. And Danielle Smith, I think she said she wants to double the population of Alberta. I don't know the time frame, but this goes back to what you said, like the people are panicking because all of a sudden you're hearing all these different languages. Canadians are good people, but when change happens really quickly, people they get unnerved. So when your premier says, "I want to double the population," people are like, "Wait a minute, how come I wasn't consulted on this?"
Yeah, I would say if Alberta was going to have or needed to have meaningful population growth, I would hope that it took the form of let's pause now, or pause now and sort of chew what we already bit off. So there's a huge amount of people, and the services and that the government's offering are not adequate, and the cost of put yourself in the shoes of like a 20-year-old. You fell in love with some beautiful other 20-year-old, and you're high school sweethearts, maybe you just got married, and now what? You want to have kids, maybe? Okay. So in today's economy, you're lucky if both of your incomes together can afford a very simple small apartment, and much less, ideally they would like to have a bedroom or a house full of bedrooms that they can slowly populate with children, and kind of build the life that their parents and grandparents enjoyed, and that is a normal, natural desire of human nature. But if you're working all the time and it's struggling to make ends meet like crazy, then you have financial stresses and that type of thing, and it's less likely that you're organically going to grow the population. So I think that you actually have to put the brakes on immigration to allow the population that is to expand and the services to catch up and prepare for that growth. Otherwise, you're inviting a world of hurt onto the Albertans that are already here.
I like what you just said. I thought it was really, it resonated with me. I've been in Canada since '89, and as far back as I can remember, they're telling us we have an aging population and we have to bring immigrants in because we're going to run out of laborers. And I'm thinking, like, wait a minute, what are all these other magical countries doing out there that they have a surplus of people, and why can't we get it right? And how is it that after 35, 40 years, we still have the same problem? It's like we're not addressing the root causes here.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. So it's a fundamental question of, do you want your economy and your population to grow at whatever rate through time because of children, or do you want it because of a massively disruptive culture shifting influx of people from all over the world? I think most Albertans, if asked, who have been here for a while, would rather see more children around. That might be true Canada wide. I don't know.
Possibly. BC people are probably too busy either smoking weed or getting safe supplies. We got different
Yeah, a lot
problems.
of them. Yeah, that's another problem that I feel is a unnecessary problem in Canada. So it's not just fentanyl. Of course, that is an immense problem. It kills an unbelievable amount of people all the time. You probably know the numbers better than I do. But even just like legalizing, I was in a McDonald's in Calgary. I'll say this: I was in a McDonald's, and the guy next to me was smoking crack while I was trying to, at the auto order thing. I was getting some lunch, and I thought, wow, like nobody cares. There's cops out on Stephen Avenue, and shouldn't guys like this who are smoking crack in a McDonald's be arrested or something? Like when I was a kid, I'm pretty sure they would have been arrested. Why are they doing drugs in the streets and allowed to and left to do it? I think it's obviously destructive to themselves. But I had an office downtown, and we had people chased by knives and people with knives who were crazy and on drugs. And
What?
often we installed a gate because our doorway was a bit sheltered, so we often would have people passed out with their drug paraphernalia in hand and their pants down or whatever, and like they're big mess to clean up, and they're just, like, that's the front door to the office. And so it seemed really weird that there's not like, why aren't these people getting arrested? I just don't understand why open hard drug use is allowed now, and when I was a kid it was not allowed. So what changed? Part of that is governance.
When I want to, this isn't a bulletproof strategy, but when I want to put my finger on the pulse of a community, I talk to the cabbies in that community. And when they were rolling out this sort of safe supply thing in the mid 90s, early 2000s, the cabbies would say, well, they're going to do the drugs anyway. Wouldn't it be better if they got it from the government where you're guaranteed that it's safe, as opposed to some drug dealer that who knows what's in it? And I didn't have a good argument against that at the time, which I do now. Well, if you encourage bad behavior, you're just going to get more of it.
That's like saying the government should be handing out condoms to rapists so they don't spread STDs. No, they should, like, the whole thing should be not allowed. I don't know. Maybe it seems like totally crazy to me to, a part of the terminology when I was a teenager was enabler. So if you knew somebody in your community who was, the drug problem person, they said, well, someone is an enabler, so they're getting their money from somewhere, or there's systems that they have in their life that enable them to have this kind of thing. Well, what happens when the government is this massive scale, well-funded enabler? How do you help them? How do you help them get off? I don't know. Can you? It's pretty hard, especially if they're incentivized. Like, if there is no drug program or problem, then all of the programs that are meant to deal with those problems lose their budget. So it's like in their interest to
Yeah.
perpetuate the drug problem so that they can continue saying, oh, we're relevant and needed. Well, I think there's a different answer, and it's a lot cheaper.
There's I have a different analogy I give for safe supply. It's like if you have all these husbands that are cheating on their wives, and the government comes in, it's like, we will provide women for these husbands to have affairs with, and it disrupt all these arguments doesn't disrupt the wives. family doesn't the husband, we can counsel him on how not to get caught by his wife. It's like, no, it's bad behavior. You can't encourage it.
I hadn't heard that analogy before, but it's interesting to think about.
Yeah, no, it's you can use it if you like. I just came up with it. Um, yeah. What did you mean by at the end there? You said that it's cheaper, like the drugs are cheaper, or
No, I mean that it's instead of having large programs to expand the drug user population, and exacerbate the problem dramatically. If you just say, okay, drug use is now illegal, if you or even just start with if you're caught doing it in public, it's you're going to get arrested. There could be something like maybe it's baby steps like that, but suddenly I think some of the and so first off, stop enabling it by supplying them a bunch of drugs for free. Uh, maybe maybe that can help.
free?
And then, but stage two, there it helps if there's also a disincentive because if you're let's say a casual drug user or something, and your friends are all going downtown, and you end up drunk, and somehow you end up with some drugs in your hands or something like that. I'm not sure what the scenario would be. I'm not a drug user, but um, something that if you know that you might get arrested that night for doing these drugs with whoever on the street that night, and that means that you might lose your job and you might lose different things because you got arrested and you're in jail for a little bit. um, that's something that might discourage some of that at far lower expense than an exacerbated drug problem. So
I,
there
I, I
are
hear what you're saying now. Yeah.
Yeah, and there are different approaches that have been taken in different parts of the world that have been statistically analyzed. And one thing that can be said with certainty, I don't know all the minute details. Some people do. There are experts on this, but one giant takeaway is don't give people free drugs. It's like statistically, the outcomes are far superior. And if there's a mandatory education and cleanup phase, that also helps. Anyway, I'm not an
It's
expert on
like
that stuff, but I am annoyed by it. It's not my number one issue, but it's like it's there.
it's like when you go to a conference and you're not even hungry, but there's free food in the buffet. You're like, well, I guess I gotta eat now.
Yeah, or like you're trying to stick to your carnivore diet, it's the New Year's resolution or whatever, and there's a big bag of chips and you haven't had dinner, and you're at your buddy's house or whatever. It's like, oh man. So it's like it's human nature that it's you can sort of understand why people who have tried chips like chips. So anyway,
there's another. I feel like as a British Columbian, I'm the expert on drug use here. So I'll tell you what I've seen. Not myself personally, but being on the distribution end through the government. So the government gives they sell the drugs. I mean, they don't sell it directly to these, drug users, but they sell it indirectly through taxpayer money. So that's a profit model there. And then they sell the treatment to the drug users, again, indirectly through tax dollars. I'm talking about rehab. And then if rehab doesn't work, they sell the homicide, made. That's also a service. Like you provide the service, you get taxed. And then these poor people that die, they harvest their organs for organ transplant. That's also a sale. Like I don't know where the profit goes, but I'm guessing there's a tax involved. So it's like a pipeline that the government is making money off.
yeah, I find that's what you described is appalling and like shocking and hardly believable. Like it seems like it's so illogical. How can this possibly be the case? And I think that a lot of Canadians are feeling that way about a lot of subjects. Like, no, it can't be that way. That's just too crazy. There's no way. Is it really? And if they are willing to look and see, the chain of incentives and numbers, they're often just horrified. And once you're horrified enough, some people just like okay with being horrified, or they ignore it because everything sucks anyway or whatever. And I don't think that's the right response. I think we can have a great country, and we can improve it. And there are specific steps and policies that Yeah, that in my mind are well represented by the PPC platform for making Canada not only not suck, but be pretty good again.
Let me ask you about the PPC policies. Give me your top three, and I'll give you mine to give you some time to think, since I'm putting you on the spot. If I remember correctly, the names in this order, I would say it's support for freedom of speech would be number one. It's support for self-defense is number two, and it's support for the right to bear arms, sort of Second Amendment in Canada. That would be three. To me, all three of those are some variation of property rights. So I own my body, which means I own my mind, which means I can think or say whatever I want. You know, I have to be polite. Defending my body, that's security of the person. That completely evaporated during COVID when people came. They're like, here, we're going to poke you with this. I'm like, I don't want that. They're like, well, you could also starve to death after we fire you. And the right to bear arms is sort of like an extension of that. If you can't defend yourself, somebody else has to defend you, like law enforcement, and basically your fate is in their hands.
Yeah. I agree with all those, and I think that they're important. They're not my top three. For me, the first one is stopping these experimental jabs. So suspending mRNA injections is the part of the PPC platform. And I think that there's enough known about reverse transcription that is actually changing people's DNA. And that's a heritable condition. That needs to stop until it's very well studied and proven to be safe. And, you know, if anybody still believes that these vaccines are safe and effective, they're morons. They're willfully blind. Like, honestly, you have to go out of your way to not learn that these things are harmful. The vaccines are clearly need to stop. So for me, that's probably in my top three. I think that the next one is, for me, smaller government. So the amount of money collected and spent and created by the Canadian government should be far, far, far less, in my opinion. That will, solving that economic drain will improve the quality of life for Canadians all across the board at many, many different levels. So if the government is not creating so much money and spending so much money and taxing so much of it back, then the perception of wealth and prosperity, and actual wealth and prosperity of the average Canadian worker goes way up. And I want to see that as in my top three as well. If I had to pick a third one, it would be stop funding international wars. I think one thing that we're not, as Canadians, very... I'll say this. I was in Ukraine in 2015. And so this is like a year after the US basically replaced the Ukrainian government with machine gun fire into protester crowds. And I was walking by, this is almost a year later. Like, I remember going by tape outlines on the street of where the bodies had fallen and candles and stuff going on. And it was, at this time, it was only 3 or 4 people. And I said to my guide, I had a guide, are we safe here? And they said, oh yeah, that was 3 days ago. We're fine. But, in 2015, there was still a lot of talk, as you might imagine, about how their government was taken over, their properly elected government was taken over, and somebody else was installed. And people who objected were literally shot to death in the streets by the government. So, and if you talk to them and ask them about sort of the tensions along the border and the Russian part of Ukraine and stuff like that, they had a lot to say about that in 2015. And I'm just like some random Canadian geologist who's there to learn about a technology, or deep sensing related, nothing war or pharmacy or anything like that. But, to see how that whole situation has progressed. And I've kept a bit of an eye on it because I was alarmed when I was there 10 years ago now. And you know what? Now, when you read about the numbers of people who are dying and watching little videos on Twitter where men are just getting, young men, old men, and everything in between, can get grabbed off the streets and thrown straight to the front lines, especially if they're from areas that the government doesn't like. those areas are just decimated. They're just taking men to go be killed by Russian munitions at the front lines. And I think we're so distanced from that in Canada. When we hear an announcement that Canada donated $20 billion or a bunch of military equipment, the average Canadian doesn't see or feel the suffering that we are causing by supplying and enabling these horrors overseas. So staying out of supporting any foreign conflicts would be also in my top three.
Man, you're going to make a tremendous MP.
Thanks. Hope so.
May Bergen, she agrees with you. Jabs are my top three as well. Medical freedom is life.
Thanks,
Thank
man.
you, May. Let's take your top three issues one at a time. I don't usually go into this much detail, but you seem to be pretty quick on your feet. That COVID argument you made, when you say that in front of the voters, I'll tell you my impression. When I talk to voters, COVID is it's just sad in my writing. It's a distant memory. They don't want to hear about it. They don't want to admit that they might have possibly done anything wrong. What reception do you get when you bring this up?
Mixture. So I think it's shocking to me when I meet somebody who's not aware that vaccines are harmful, or especially these COVID vaccines. So yeah, I guess thinking of their reaction, like a lot of people are, if they haven't, if they're not aware, they're probably closed to that awareness. They're not interested, and there's probably nothing you can say that'll interest them. Even if they've had family members die of myocarditis or turbo cancer, or like just a stroke right after they were injected, they're just, oh, it's probably coincidence, or who knows, maybe there was something, or somehow they just don't want to look at the society-wide trends and graphs that are horrifying. So, and then there are a lot of people who are upset about it, and there are still recommended mRNA injections for children in Alberta. So, like, why would that be the case? Like, I read an article recently about somebody who died because they were waiting for an organ transplant in Canada, and they couldn't get this organ transplant because they wouldn't take this experimental vaccination. Like, why would, in this day and age, with the knowledge we have and the statistical approaches we have, why would it possibly be the case that to get an organ transplant, you would need to have an mRNA injection first? And the same goes for a little kid. Like, why would, if it's known to cause like unusual clots that kill people, or risk of strokes and myocarditis and brain damage and all these various other things, why would you ever advocate for that to go into like a little kid who's just developing? To me, it's just total insanity. And a lot of people agree with that too.
So I'm horrible with names, but the woman you're referring to that was denied treatment, I think her name was Sheila something. Prairie, you know everything. If you could research it for us and put it in the comments. I'm gonna read a question from Prairie, or a comment, but before I do, I was just in Edmonton recently for the National Citizens Inquiry, and Sean Buckley, the gentleman who was moderating, he actually said, he's like, within, what is it, eight days of birth they're giving, or 30 days of birth they're giving the mRNA injection, and he goes like, we can't do this. You know, if you're a grown adult and you want to alter your DNA, fine, maybe, but not to children, babies.
I couldn't agree more. I think it's an awful, involuntary, damaging thing, potentially life-ending or lifelong damage to it's child abuse. For just simple. Why would we be mandating child abuse? Why are we mandating child abuse? So that's what more people should get involved in politics, because our governments are, engaged in child abuse.
No, it's a good rallying cry. Get involved with politics. Prairie says, I had a stroke during lockdown, and when the ambulance attendants arrived, that was the first question they asked me: when did you get your shot? Comments?
It's sadly a common thing, and I feel bad for these ambulance drivers. I follow a couple of them on Twitter who, they seem highly depressed because they see these things day after day after day where they're scooping up bodies or dealing with people who are suffering bad side effects from vaccination. So my comment is I'm sorry to hear that happened to you, and I'm unsurprised as well that the medic said that.
Horrified but not shocked.
Yeah.
Or surprised, not surprised. So the name of the woman was Sheila Annette Lewis. I believe she's passed now because she couldn't get surgery.
Yeah. Probably we beat that drum already, but it's completely crazy that in 2025 these policies can still exist.
Yeah. Your next issue was limited government. Again, I think I still have PTSD from watching the Liberal leadership convention yesterday. And Jean Chrétien comes up and he's bragging and boasting about how he was the first government to have a surplus. So the first government to reduce the deficit. And I've asked around, I don't expect you to know this. I just found this out recently. He didn't actually reduce government spending. He did two things. One, he kicked it down to the provincial level. So right now we have a 50-50 split. 50% of our national budget is Ottawa. The other 50 is the provinces. The other thing he did is he kicked the can down the road. He's like, we'll give you more pensions, we'll give you more money. It'll be somebody else's problem. So my question to you, or give me your comments. Yes, I think it's a good start for Ottawa to shed some of its funding and power back to the provinces. And then at least all we need is one good province like Alberta to be fiscally responsible, to put pressure on the other provinces. So if they're spending like drunken sailors, everybody can flood to Alberta.
Yeah, although that exacerbates problems in Alberta too. So now you're kind of...
I knew you'd say that.
Yeah. So you're right. The provinces should be fiscally responsible. And, in general, whether it's a company or a government, the further down you can responsibly push decisions down within your organization, the better and the more efficient your organization will be. Like how, if you look at how many administrators are in our hospital system now versus 1950 or something versus doctors, it's like there's doctors per capita might have even gone slightly down, but the administration and related costs is just like totally through the roof. So, I'm a big fan of being fiscally conservative because it leads to so many knock-on effects throughout all of society. So, and another thing I'll say about Chrétien, and thinking that he changed things, if you look at how they measured inflation, so if you look up something called Shadow Stats CPI, it shows you like how they changed the hedonic adjustments when they measure inflation in 1980. They changed the process. And the way that they do that is, for example, if you bought wool pants in 1930, presumably they're of similar quality as wool pants that you buy in 1970. So maybe the 1970 ones are a little bit better. They have a zipper and, or whatever, some sort of better pockets or something. But the hedonic adjustment says this 1970 wool pants are so much better than the 1930 wool pants that they're more valuable. So they even do this with they say, okay, today's ground beef is so much better than the T-bone steaks of 1960. They're just like things that are just absolute nonsense on these hedonic adjustments to fine tune what they say is the inflation rate. So they changed the process again in 1990 of how these hedonic adjustments are made. And so when people say, and there's headlines, oh, CPI, the core, our inflation rate is currently whatever percent. If you go back to the same methodology used before 1990, or even more realistically before 1980, and by realistically I mean more less tampered with in terms of hedonic adjustments, you end up realizing that our inflation rate is far higher than what is advertised as the government approved CPI number. And that's something that most people only feel in their pocketbook. They're like, why is it so expensive? Remember, we used to go on vacations, look at this, how expensive it is for, whatever it is, a jug of milk, and there's other reasons for that. But so maybe that's a bad product example, but wool pants, what does a good pair of wool pants cost today? A lot. Like the price tag would say something a lot different than, in prior years, and it would more accurately represent what actual inflation is. So yeah, anyway, that's another sort of aspect of talking about smaller government. They get less games to play if they have less money of your money and our money to play them with.
No, yeah, I agree. A big part of the problem is that government's really big. But this adjustment, are you saying like a T-bone steak today costs twice as much as what it did in the 1930s? But then they're like, yeah, but the steak today is twice as juicy, so it's really 4 times as much. Is that what they're
Yeah,
doing?
that's exactly it. Or even worse yet, they like basically say this product is kind of equivalent. So now we think that,
They do it the other way, yeah. So it's
the
twice as
ground
expensive and twice
beef
as
of today.
juicy.
Yeah. So even if you have like an identical T-bone steak as you had in 1930, honestly, they're probably, a lot of them aren't as good as the ones from 1930, but they'll say yes. The equivalent product today, which they might just be ground beef mixed with, rice or something, and say that's as high quality. The hedonic adjustment is a comparable high quality, and it's on par with the 1930 T-bone steak instead of today's T-bone steaks. And that's a way that they can sort of play around with what they state is the inflation rate.
This is why nobody trusts government. Again, I go back to this guy. This guy's rent free in my mind right now, Jean Chrétien. He's like, I oppose this argument that Canada is broken. We have the lowest debt to GDP ratio. And I'm like, buddy, just look outside. Everyone's miserable. Everything's expensive. No one can afford anything. You don't need an economist to tell you that things are bad.
Yeah. Yeah. You said it.
So moving on to your last one, what was it? It was COVID, the government, and wars. Was it foreign wars?
Yeah. Foreign wars.
What's the pushback, or what reception do you notice when you say, when I say that we shouldn't have gotten involved in the Ukraine war, the Yanukovych, the Maidan coup? Immediately people tell me, well, first of all, I would never bring it up with my voters. They just, for some reason, they have no idea what I'm talking about. But they say that it's Russian disinformation. What do they say to you?
It's pretty hard to shut me down. I've been there. I know a lot about it, and so yeah, it's one of those things. If it's beyond someone's comfort level to think about, they just kind of prefer a different topic. And I'm not out there ramming conversations. If somebody is willing to engage with me on a conversation, I'm very happy to. But yeah, in general, like if people still think that this Ukraine-Russian conflict is serving some sort of useful purpose, that it is going to help the world be protected somehow from Russia, who, if they wanted to nuke us, actually just could at any moment throughout this whole time. But yeah, you can't really make an argument unless people are willing to look at the building blocks of facts and logic along the way. And so if they've been watching a lot of the mainstream news and have heard over and over that this is to defend the democracy of Ukraine or something like that. First off, they probably don't know any Ukrainian people. And if they do and still believe that, maybe the Ukrainian people that they know also watched a lot of mainstream news. But there is not something good happening out there. And if people think that there is, it's hard to justify why do you think that? Well, there's not a lot of factual, logical reasons to support believing in that Canada should throw huge amounts of treasure and weapons overseas.
You mentioned how most Canadians don't understand the consequences of sending tanks over to Ukraine. What do you think our moral obligation should be, or what is the right thing for Canada to do? When should it send arms, and when should it refrain from doing so?
My general personal belief is all wars are banker wars. So there's never a good time to send tanks to some military or another, because they're going to do something bad with those things. If you're defending your own like community scale thing or tribe, that's a different. Our human minds have a better time grasping that and understanding that. So if somebody, if there's 100 guys marching into your community with weapons, and they're gonna like chop up all the people in your community, you're definitely gonna react differently than if you read about that happening somewhere else. So there's a big psychological disconnection, and it's like if something's in your own hands and in the hands of people that you know and trust, that's one thing. But if it's in the hands of governments that are largely controlled by foreign banks, somebody's just playing at war and causing a whole bunch of suffering along the way. And there's a whole bunch of people who get caught up in the patriotism of war or the glory of combat or whatever. But I'm not one of those. I really believe that once it gets much beyond community scale defense, it gets really dark, and you're likely inadvertently funding something that you if you knew what was happening, you wish you didn't do.
Kind of related question. What do you think Canada's role should be vis-a-vis NATO?
I think it should drop out of NATO. Personally, I don't mind Canada having a great military, but having commitments to follow each other into senseless wars. I think this is not the Stone Age where it's like three little tribes and hey, if ours gets attacked by the one from over the mountain, will you guys come help us? And that's a different thing, like how Switzerland started out with at the Swearing Stone, where it was three little tribes that all kind of agreed to mutual defense, and now there's 20 cantons or whatever. And it's still a small country, but they have a great military, and I guess that's a whole side topic I don't need to get into. But in general, I don't want Canada dragged into foreign wars. If Canada needs to defend itself, it should have some capacity to do that, and I think some serious capacity to do that, but not at the behest of some other nation beckoning them to come and send your young men to die here.
No, great answer.
I don't mind if they volunteer. Like if some Canadian wants to go participate, well, maybe don't mind is the wrong word. We should have the freedom to live, more or less how we want to. So if somebody super believes in the cause of the Ukraine side or the Russian side in the trench, and they want to die in one trench or the other trench, they should have the freedom, and I think they do, to have the ability to go and do that. But to take money from old Aunt so-and-so, her tax money, and send that to go support the deaths of others that she doesn't even know, that's, I think, problematic.
No, I love the way you put it. I agree with that. What about the UN?
Yeah, drop them. They're super corrupt. They're spending all sorts of insane things. Canada should have nothing to do with them and be embarrassed that they're a participant. So I think there was like a general feeling that let's all hold hands and heal the world and be peaceful after World War II, and that's what we were kind of taught in school. But if you look at if you start doing some reading about their great replacement plans and all of these different things that are their strategies for dramatically, let's say, slowly taking over the world, it's disgusting. I think Canada should have nothing to do with it, and I think Canada should be embarrassed to be a participant in the UN.
This is like the A Fuego Hour with Javier Milei. You see that video? He's like, A Fuego. Get rid of every international organization.
Well, yes, I actually most international organizations, that is true. They have proven themselves to be, on average, wildly corrupt and causing problems. And so, Yeah, why do we need to be part of the UN? What is the UN doing to benefit Canadians? Why are we spending into it? Does do we have it's not like we have this, we're a super rich country with a surplus of money. We can't even balance our budget or even come close to it for the last decade plus, well, a lot longer. Um, if individuals are allowed to build up their own prosperity, they go out and fix the world. Like doctors, who are helping, a dentist in Africa pulling teeth, or like there's all these things that wealthy people just go do. Good, wealthy people go do good things. And they do it much more effectively than some bloated program full of administrators. So, anyway, that's my belief.
Yeah, like the UN, the two stories that come to mind. One was the recent case where they were funding terrorism out of Palestine and Gaza, whatever you think about it. The other one, there was a massive, like, there's a scandal involving sexual assault and sexual harassment through NATO, not NATO, through the UN. And that institution's got to go. It's just a waste of money.
Yeah, it's a waste of money, and it's doing, I think, things that most Canadians wouldn't want done. So, what? Why are we funding it? It seems a bit crazy.
All right, so I don't know. This has been the agreement hour. I don't know, really. The only thing we disagreed on is that you don't want all the people in Canada to flood to Alberta.
Yeah. I'm not sure that even you would disagree with that, because we'd be sopping up all of the people who want a good job in a prosperous place in that scenario. So, what gets left behind is sort of a weakened town or whatever. So,
You know how there was that incident where Castro, the United States allowed Castro to send certain people over to claim refugee status. So he took everybody out of the prisons and put them on boats and send them to America. We're probably going to do the same thing here in BC. Take all our liberals and communists and shove them your way. You can deal with that.
yeah, there's been very generous programs, free drugs, welfare spending in BC is like unbelievably generous. To the point where I know people who wouldn't even consider getting a job because it'd be such a reduction in their income in BC. So I don't know, I think I've heard Alberta is a little less largesse and doesn't hand out free drugs, or at least not to the same extent. But yeah, it does attract a lot of, like, if you say here's a whole bunch of free stuff. So let's say you're living in a country and you're poor and you're ill, and someone says you can come here and we'll pay for you to live here and we'll take care of your illnesses, and you don't have to work. We'll just give you spending money. Um, that's a pretty straightforward decision for a lot of people. Like, why would I stay here where I'm poor and ill and I have to try and eke out a living when I can be paid and fixed elsewhere? So, and again, it's different if you've paid into a system where, like, if you do get harmed, let's say you have a job site injury or a heart attack or whatever, and you've been paying into the tax system for and contributing value in your society for a long time, it's normal and reasonable that your community helps you through whatever those struggles may be. But to just invite the whole world to have all that for free, there's there's limits on what Canada can do, and I personally believe we're way past where reasonable limits already are.
Yeah, we've been stretched past the breaking point. I'm not going to touch on the immigration. That's another issue which I disagree with: bringing people in and then giving them access to a welfare system. But going back to like CERB, so CERB was an extreme example of welfare, and I've talked to a lot of business owners. The way that they describe CERB to me is not assistance; it's competition. Like the government is outbidding the employer by a lot for doing less. So like, and there's no service, there's no productivity out of it. So if you have a tech company and Amazon is a tech company, they can outbid you, and that's not really fair to you. But at least the country is still getting something productive produced out of it. But when the government does it, they're just paying them to stay home. They're outbidding you, but there's no production.
Yeah, so I was running a business during this. We had about 65 people. And so one example is there was a federal wage subsidy program where for 6 months, if you hired somebody who had a degree and was under 30, they noticed this was a demographic that was being annihilated. So there wasn't good jobs anywhere in the economy during lockdowns. But you might have like 2 engineering degrees and did internships at Tesla and Ballard, and like perfect 4.0 on your grades, and you can't find a job. There's just nothing going on. So they had this program for this, targeting this one situation. And I hired 20 or so, actually more than 20 people, thinking, okay, well, they can do something productive and get something on their resume. And I otherwise would not have hired most of them because without that, I just I didn't have the budget for it. But yeah, I got a whole bunch of people going. But one of the curiosities was we did lose some people to CERB. So they realized that. So it wasn't like a high paid job that I introduced. It was just a way for them to learn and get some experience on, and close down their resume gap a bit, and find a local high tech hydrogen related thing to do. And yeah, I was disappointed to lose some of them to who thought if I just stay home, I'll make roughly the same money, or maybe a little bit more or less. But that way I just sit on my butt. And I felt like the government shouldn't be taking people out of the workforce to go sit on their butt. And yeah, I have a lot more feelings about that. So it was a crisis they created. I had an energy company, so I had the excuse to say we're essential workers and we're going to keep the office open, and I'll write you guys all notes that if you need to travel, you're an essential worker. But yeah, CERB and all of the chaos around it would not exist if our government was not overstepping its duties to our civil rights. So the main issue on that whole thing was civil rights and personal choice. Lockdowns are never the right answer.
It just occurred to me, one of the responsibilities of government, or at least one of its aims, should be to reduce unemployment. In this case, they encouraged and facilitated more unemployment.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. It seems there are many examples where the government does the opposite of what you think would be a logical thing for them to do. So if unemployment is a bad thing to have, and your goal is to get more people involved in the labor force and productive, and then you would think that the program should be designed to have that as the outcome. And there are examples in all across governance where what you expect is the logical path is the opposite of the program in place, whether that's drugs or CERB or there's all sorts of examples.
Yeah, it's
war for peace.
or how about the budget will balance itself? That's
Yeah,
very funny.
that was a doozy.
Yeah. All right. Well, Grant, we've actually gone over the 1 hour mark, but I really enjoyed this conversation. Like I said, you'll make a fantastic MP. You have business experience. You're very knowledgeable. So it's good to have you on the team.
Thanks, Payman. I'm glad to be helping along with the PPC goal, which is to get elected and get the conversations happening, because I think there's just so much blocked bits of evidence and facts that all Canadians need to be aware of, and conversation vectors that aren't happening because our mainstream media is not forced to deal with them because they're not coming up in the House of Parliament and so on.
Absolutely. Grant, I'm going to need you to give us some information. Your writing name again, how they can learn more about you, maybe get in contact with you if you have a public email, and where they can donate or volunteer.
Sure. Grant Strem is my name. My riding is Calgary Signal Hill, which is not just the community of Signal Hill. There's many, and I can send you a map if you email me at grant.strem@teamppc.ca. And yeah, happy to meet you. Please reach out. To donate, I don't recall the exact pathway, so I shouldn't guess at it in this recording, but I'm sure there is a way. And I can get that to you if you contact me.
And I'm just going to add something. I hope it doesn't get me in trouble. Many of the candidates to receive donations, they can go to the People's Party website, go to candidates, search for grant. There's usually a link for donations.
Okay. Good to know. Well,
You
thanks.
could also donate to me if you want.
Yeah,
All right,
please do.
Grant.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks for coming on. Take care. Bye.
Thanks for having me. Bye for now.